$3 million. That was the exact price tag of the wedding I had meticulously planned for the man who destroyed my family. I stood in the shadows of the grand ballroom at the Sterling estate in Coral Gables. The Florida humidity had vanished inside the air-conditioned sanctuary of marble and gold. 500 guests from the American Energy elite sat on white velvet chairs. They whispered in anticipation. They waited for the moment the groom would kiss the bride and seal a merger worth billions. But they did not know the truth. The groom standing at the altar in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo was known to them as Julian Thorne. He was charming. He was sophisticated. He was a venture capitalist with a vague but impressive portfolio. However, I knew the man beneath the silk suit. To me, he was Brad Miller. He was the predator who had seduced my younger sister 5 years ago in Chicago. He was the con artist who drained her life savings, drove her to a mental breakdown, and vanished into thin air. I adjusted the tiny earpiece hidden beneath my blonde curls. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was not just a wedding. This was an execution. I checked my clipboard with a trembling hand. Every detail was perfect. The orchids were imported from Thailand. The champagne was vintage Dom Perignon. And the trap was set. I looked at the bride. Vanessa Sterling was the sole heiress to the Sterling, Texas oil fortune. She looked radiant and innocent in her Vera Wang gown. She had no idea that the man holding her hands was not in love with her. He was in love with her trust fund. Julian turned his head slightly. His eyes scanned the room with the predatory calculation I remembered so well. For a split second, his gaze landed on me. I froze. He smiled politely at me. He did not recognize me. He saw only Jennifer Cole, the efficient and highly recommended wedding planner who had catered to his every whim for 6 months. He did not see Jessica, the brunette girl with glasses he had mocked years ago. He did not see the plastic surgery I had undergone after the car accident that almost took my life. He did not see the sister of his victim. He saw a servant. I offered him a professional nod. Inside, I was screaming. The officiant began the ceremony. His voice echoed through the silent hall. He spoke of love and eternal commitment. The irony tasted like bile in my throat. I touched the small tablet computer resting on the table beside me. My finger hovered over the execute button. 5 years of hunting. 5 years of tracking digital footprints across 3 continents. It all came down to this single moment in Miami. Suddenly, a wave of panic washed over me. What if the signal failed? What if the FBI team stationed in the surveillance van outside lost the feed? What if Julian had a backup plan? He was smart. He was dangerous. If he realized what was happening before the trap snapped shut, he would run. And if he ran, he would disappear forever. Again, I took a deep breath. I forced my face to remain a mask of professional calm. The officiant asked the question that would signal the end of Julian Thorne. He asked if anyone present had just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony. The room fell into a heavy silence. A few guests chuckled nervously. It was a formality. Nobody ever objected at a high society wedding. Julian squeezed Vanessa's hands. He looked into her eyes with practiced adoration. He was seconds away from accessing the Sterling family accounts. He was seconds away from victory. But he was wrong. I stepped forward from the shadows. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Every head turned toward me. The guests gasped. Vanessa looked confused. Julian turned to look at the wedding planner who had interrupted his perfect moment. His annoyance was visible. He signaled for me to step back with a sharp glare. I did not step back. I walked directly into the center of the aisle. I looked straight into his eyes. I saw the confusion flicker in his gaze. Then, I saw the dawn of recognition. I reached for the microphone stand. My hand was steady now. The fear was gone. Only the cold fire of vengeance remained. I spoke clearly into the microphone. I apologized for the interruption. I announced that there was one final surprise gift for the groom. Julian took a step toward me. The charm dropped from his face. He sensed the danger. He opened his mouth to order security to remove me. But it was too late. I pressed the button on my tablet. The massive LED screens behind the altar, which had been displaying romantic photos of the couple, suddenly went black. A low hum filled the room. Then, a voice boomed through the speakers. It was not the voice of the officiant. It was a recording. It was the voice of Julian Thorne. But he was not whispering words of love. He was laughing. The recording played a conversation from 3 months ago. A conversation I had captured with a bug planted in his bachelor pad. The voice of Julian bragged to an accomplice. He called Vanessa a gullible cow. He laughed about how easy it was to fake the financial records. He stated clearly that he would liquidate her assets within 6 months and leave her penniless. The ballroom erupted. Vanessa dropped his hands as if they were burning coals. She stepped back, her face pale with shock. Julian froze. His face drained of color. He looked at the screen. He looked at the guests. Then, he looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew, but the video was just the beginning. The screens flickered again. Now, they showed something else. Something that made the gasps turn into screams of horror. And I stood there, the conductor of his destruction, watching his world collapse in real time. I smiled. The real wedding had just begun. To understand why I destroyed a $3 million wedding, you have to go back to a rainy Tuesday in Chicago exactly 5 years ago. I was not standing in a ballroom then. I was standing in the sterile hallway of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The air smelled of antiseptic and despair. My younger sister, Lily, lay in a coma behind the glass door of the intensive care unit. The doctors told me it was an overdose of sleeping pills. They called it a cry for help. But I knew it was attempted suicide. Lily had been a bright, ambitious graphic designer with a savings account full of dreams. Then she met Brad Miller. Brad was perfect. He was a consultant for a tech startup. He drove a Porsche. He took her to dinners at Alinea and weekends in the Hamptons. He made her feel like the center of the universe. Then, the emergencies started. First, it was a frozen bank account due to an IRS audit. He needed $10,000 to unlock his assets. Lily gave it to him. Then, it was a rare investment opportunity that required immediate cash. He promised to double her money in a month. Lily refinanced our grandmother's house in the suburbs to give him $200,000. Finally, the disappearance. One morning, Lily woke up to an empty apartment. Brad was gone. His clothes were gone. The Porsche was gone. But he left something behind. He left a mountain of credit card debt in her name. He left a second mortgage she could not pay. And he left a cruel note on the kitchen counter. The note simply thanked her for the donation to his retirement fund. Lily broke. She lost the house. She lost her job. And finally, she tried to lose her life. I sat by her bedside holding her limp hand. I swore an oath to a silent room. I promised that the man who did this would not just go to jail. He would suffer. However, catching Brad was impossible. The police told me that Brad Miller did not exist. The social security number he gave Lily belonged to a deceased man in Ohio. The Porsche was a rental. He was a ghost. I spent 2 years hitting dead ends. I hired private investigators who took my money and gave me nothing. I was ready to give up. Then, fate intervened in a violent way. I was driving home late one night on the icy Kennedy Expressway. A drunk driver swerved into my lane. My sedan spun out of control and slammed into the concrete divider. I woke up weeks later with a shattered face. The steering wheel had crushed my nose. The windshield glass had scarred my cheeks. I looked in the mirror and I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. Most people would have been devastated. But as I looked at my ruined reflection, an idea took root in my mind. I realized that if I did not recognize myself, then neither would Brad Miller. I used the insurance settlement money for extensive reconstructive surgery. I did not ask the surgeon to restore my old face. I asked him to create a new one. I dyed my dark hair blonde. I changed my eye color with permanent contacts. I adopted a new name. Jessica, the grieving sister, died on that operating table. Jenny Cole, the high-end event planner, was born. I spent the next year building my cover. I obtained certifications. I forged a portfolio of luxury events. I tracked the digital crumbs Brad had left behind using illegal software I bought on the dark web. I found a trace of him in a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The money trail led to a new identity in Miami. Julian Thorne. He had reinvented himself as a venture capitalist in the Magic City. He was hunting bigger game now. I moved to Miami. I infiltrated the social circle of the ultra-wealthy in Brickell and Coral Gables. I knew his type. He would target old money. He would look for a woman with a large inheritance and low self-esteem. I found his target before he even proposed. Vanessa Sterling was sweet, naive, and worth $500 million. When I saw Julian courting her at a gala at the Vizcaya Museum, I knew my time had come. I positioned myself to be hired as their wedding planner. I underbid every competitor. I promised Vanessa a fairy tale. The first time I met Julian face to face as Jenny Cole, I was terrified. We sat in the Sterling family library. He looked exactly the same, perhaps a little tan. He stared at me for a long moment. My heart stopped. I thought he saw through the surgery. I thought he saw the sister of the girl he destroyed. But then he smiled that charming, shark-like smile. He told me he liked my efficiency. He flirted with me right in front of his fiancée. He had no idea he was hiring his executioner. For 6 months, I became his shadow. I learned his schedule. I learned his passwords. I learned that he was planning to embezzle Vanessa's fortune through a fake charity foundation immediately after the honeymoon. I needed evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence. I became the perfect servant. I brought him coffee. I organized his bachelor party. I gained access to his penthouse to measure for decorations. While he was out playing golf, I was planting listening devices in his study. I cloned his phone while he was in the shower. I installed a keystroke logger on his laptop. I gathered terabytes of data. I had his bank transfers. I had his emails to his partners in crime. I had enough to send him to federal prison for 20 years. But prison was not enough. He had humiliated Lily. He had destroyed her reputation. So I decided to do the same to him. I wanted to destroy him in front of the very people he was trying to impress. I wanted the Sterling family, the senators, and the business tycoons to see him for the rat he was. That brings us back to the ballroom. The chaos was unfolding perfectly. The audio recording of him calling Vanessa a cow was still echoing in the shocked silence of the room. Vanessa stood frozen at the altar. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup. Her father, the oil tycoon, Robert Sterling, was turning a shade of purple that suggested an imminent heart attack. Julian looked at me with wild eyes. He looked like a trapped animal. He lunged toward me. He shouted that it was a lie. He screamed that I had doctored the audio. He pointed a trembling finger at me and demanded security to arrest me. 2 large security guards started to move toward the aisle. They were confused. They did not know who to obey. I held my ground. I looked Julian in the eye. I spoke into the microphone again. My voice was calm, cold, and deadly. I told him that the audio was just the appetizer. I told him to look at the screen for the main course. I pressed the button on my tablet for the second time. The screen shifted. The image of the audio waveform disappeared. It was replaced by a live video feed. The audience gasped again. The video feed was coming from inside the groom's private suite upstairs. The suite where Julian had stayed the night before. But the room was not empty in the video. 3 men in dark suits were standing around a pile of open suitcases. They were sifting through stacks of cash, fake passports, and a gun. One of the men in the video looked up at the camera. He wore a jacket with yellow letters on the back. FBI. Julian turned back to the screen. His knees buckled. The guests realized what was happening. This was not just a prank. This was a federal raid happening in real time, broadcasted for their entertainment. I looked at Julian. He was shaking his head, muttering no over and over again. But I was not done. I had one more secret to reveal. A secret that connected his past in Chicago to his present in Miami. A secret that would ensure he never saw daylight again. I took a step closer to him. The security guards stopped moving. They sensed that the power in the room had shifted to the woman in the black dress. I asked him a simple question. I asked him if he remembered the name Lily. His eyes widened. The recognition finally hit him like a physical blow. He looked at my eyes, the only part of me that surgery hadn't changed completely. He whispered my name. Not Jenny. He whispered Jessica. And then, the doors to the ballroom burst open. The heavy oak doors slammed against the walls with a thunderous crash. The sound echoed like an explosion in the silent ballroom. 500 heads turned in unison. A man stepped out of the bright Florida sunlight and into the dim hall. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He leaned heavily on a metal cane. However, it was his face that made the guests gasp in horror. The left side of his face was a roadmap of melted skin and twisted scar tissue. It was a visage of pure agony preserved in flesh. I watched Julian. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened and closed without sound. He knew this man. To the world, the man in the doorway was a stranger. To me, he was Gavin Roach. But to Julian, he was a ghost. Gavin was Julian's former technology officer. He was the genius who had built the algorithms for the first Ponzi scheme back in Seattle. When Gavin threatened to go to the police 3 years ago, His car mysteriously exploded on the I-5 highway. Julian attended the funeral. He cried crocodile tears. He sent flowers to the empty casket. Yet, here, Gavin stood. Alive. Broken. And furious. Gavin limped down the center aisle. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of his cane was the only sound in the room. Julian began to shake. The arrogant veneer of the billionaire investor cracked and fell away. Beneath it, the desperate street hustler emerged. Gavin stopped 10 feet from the altar. He lifted his good hand and pointed a trembling finger at the groom. He accused Julian of murder. He screamed that Julian had rigged the brakes and the fuel line. His voice was raspy, destroyed by smoke and fire. But it carried the weight of the grave. The guests began to panic. Some scrambled toward the emergency exits. Others hid under the tables. The FBI agents from the back of the room surged forward. They shouted commands for everyone to get down. They drew their weapons. But Julian was faster. He realized there was no talking his way out of this. The evidence was on the screen. The witness was in the aisle. The game was over. Instantly, desperation took over. He grabbed Vanessa by her hair. She screamed in pain. He yanked her body in front of his like a human shield. With his other hand, he reached into his tuxedo jacket. He did not pull out a ring box. He pulled out a ceramic steak knife he had swiped from the head table during the rehearsal dinner. He pressed the serrated blade against the soft skin of Vanessa's throat. He screamed for the agents to stay back. He threatened to slit her throat if anyone took another step. The room froze. The FBI agents lowered their weapons slightly. They could not shoot. Vanessa was the daughter of a senator and an oil tycoon. She was too high profile to risk. Robert Sterling, Vanessa's father, roared in anger and tried to rush the altar. 2 agents held him back. Julian looked wild. He scanned the room for an exit. There was none. He locked eyes with me. I stood just a few feet away, behind the microphone stand. I did not move. I did not flinch. He demanded a helicopter. He demanded safe passage to the airport. Then, he demanded the one thing he cared about more than his freedom. He demanded to check his offshore accounts. He screamed that if the $5 million transfer from the Sterling Trust, which he had initiated silently on his phone 5 minutes ago, was not completed, he would kill the bride. I looked at him with pity. Even with a knife in his hand, he was still a greedy fool. I took a slow step forward. The FBI lead agent signaled me to stop, but I ignored him. I knew Julian. I knew how his mind worked. He needed to feel like he was in control. I held up my tablet computer. The screen glowed in the dim light. I told him to look. I announced that I had authorized the transfer myself. I lied with a straight face. I told him the money was in his Cayman Island account. Julian narrowed his eyes. He did not believe me. He demanded to see the confirmation code. I turned the tablet screen toward him. It displayed a bank confirmation page. It showed a balance of $5 million deposited into the account ending in 409. Julian glanced at the screen. A wave of relief washed over his sweaty face. He smiled. A sick, twisted smile of victory. He thought he had won. He thought that even if he had to flee the country, he would do it as a rich man. He tightened his grip on Vanessa, preparing to drag her toward the rear exit. However, he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the woman standing in front of him. He thought I was just a vengeful sister. He thought I was just a wedding planner with a grudge. He did not know that for the past 6 months, I had not just been planning his wedding. I had been building a financial prison. I spoke softly. My voice was calm amidst the chaos. I asked him if he checked the name on the account. Julian frowned. He looked at the screen again. He squinted at the small print under the account number. The account did not belong to Julian Thorne. It did not belong to his shell company. The account holder's name was the Lilly Foundation for Victims of Fraud. His eyes widened. He looked at me. I explained the reality of his situation. I told him that I had intercepted his keystrokes weeks ago. I had rewritten the routing numbers in his banking app. When he pressed transfer 5 minutes ago, he did not steal Vanessa's money. He donated his own hidden savings, every penny he had stolen from my sister, from Gavin, and from countless others, to a charity I established in my sister's name. He was not rich. He was bankrupt. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the phone in his other hand. He checked his balance. 0. Rage exploded in his eyes. Pure, animalistic rage. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his money. He had lost his reputation. He had nothing left to lose. He screamed a sound of pure hatred. He raised the knife. He stopped using Vanessa as a shield. He decided he wanted only one thing before he went down. He wanted to kill me. He shoved Vanessa violently to the floor. She tumbled down the altar steps. Then, he charged at me. The distance between us was less than 10 feet. The FBI agents were too far away. Gavin was too crippled to stop him. He lunged, the knife aiming straight for my heart. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the madness in his eyes. I saw the glint of the blade. I did not run. I did not scream. I had anticipated this moment. I had planned for it. As he closed the distance, I reached into the silk sash of my bridesmaid dress. My hand closed around the cold metal object I had concealed there all morning. It was not a gun. It was something far more personal. Julian was 3 feet away. 2 feet. I pulled the object out and triggered it. The blade was inches from my chest. I saw the serrated edge of the ceramic steak knife. I saw the beads of sweat on Julian's forehead. I saw the intention to kill in his eyes. I squeezed the trigger of the device in my hand. It was a high-voltage taser, disguised as a makeup compact. I had bought it in a spy shop in Miami 3 weeks ago. However, I was too slow. Julian was fueled by pure adrenaline. He swatted my hand aside. The taser fired uselessly into the air, the electric prongs sparking against the marble floor. I stumbled back. I lost my footing on the slick surface. I fell hard onto the steps of the altar. Julian loomed over me. He raised the knife for a second strike. He roared a sound of triumph. I squeezed my eyes shut. I waited for the cold steel to pierce my skin. I waited for the end. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a sound that I did not expect. It was the sound of tearing silk. Then, a blur of white exploded into my vision. Vanessa Sterling, the weeping, fragile heiress who had just been thrown to the floor, launched herself into the air. She did not move like a sheltered socialite. She moved like a guided missile. She slammed into Julian's side with the force of a linebacker. Her shoulder drove into his ribs with a sickening crunch. Julian gasped. The air left his lungs. He flew sideways and crashed onto the hard stone floor. The knife skittered away across the tiles. I scrambled backward, gasping for air. I looked up, expecting to see Vanessa cowering in fear or running away. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Vanessa stood over Julian. She had ripped the long train of her Vera Wang wedding gown to free her legs. She stood in a combat stance that was unmistakable to anyone who knew law enforcement. Julian tried to scramble to his feet. He reached for the knife. Vanessa stepped forward. She drove the heel of her white satin shoe directly into his wrist. Bone snapped. Julian screamed. He clutched his broken hand, curling into a fatal position. Vanessa did not stop. She dropped her knee onto his spine, pinning him to the ground with practiced efficiency. She reached under the layers of her torn dress. She did not pull out a handkerchief. She pulled out a pair of matte black steel handcuffs. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The guests were paralyzed. The FBI agents who were rushing the stage slowed down. Even they looked confused. Vanessa slapped the cuffs onto Julian's wrists. The metallic click-click echoed through the room. She leaned down close to his ear. Her voice was no longer the soft, high-pitched tremble of a blushing bride. It was deep, authoritative, and cold as ice. She recited his Miranda rights from memory. She told him he had the right to remain silent. She told him that anything he said would be used against him in a federal court of law. Julian looked up at her from the floor. His face was a mask of confusion and pain. He stammered. He asked who she was. Vanessa stood up. She smoothed the front of her ruined dress. She looked at the team of FBI agents who had finally surrounded the altar. The lead agent Holcomb stepped forward. He holstered his weapon. He looked at the bride and nodded respectfully. He addressed her as Special Agent Sterling. Mayev dropped. I stared at the woman I thought I had been protecting for 6 months. She was not Vanessa Sterling. The gullible oil heiress. She turned to face me. She wiped the fake tears from her cheeks. A small, confident smile played on her lips. She explained the truth. There was no Vanessa Sterling. The real Sterling family had no daughter. They had 3 sons. The woman standing before me was Agent Vanessa Cruz, of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. She explained that the Bureau had been tracking Julian Thorne for 2 years. They knew he targeted wealthy families. They knew he was looking for a whale in Miami. So, they gave him one. They created the persona of the lonely heiress. They planted fake news articles about her inheritance. They baited the trap. And Julian swam right into it. However, there was one variable the FBI had not accounted for. Vanessa looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and admiration. She admitted that my interference almost ruined their operation. When I hacked Julian's phone, I inadvertently triggered the FBI's surveillance alarms. They thought I was a rival con artist trying to steal their target. For months, while I was investigating Julian, the FBI was investigating me. But then, they realized who I was. They found the file on my sister, Lily. They realized I wasn't a criminal. I was a vigilante. Vanessa told me that they decided to let me play my game. They needed Julian to actually attempt the wire transfer to charge him with grand larceny. They needed him to believe he had won. My fake wedding ceremony provided the perfect pressure cooker. My hacked transfer to the charity provided the smoking gun. I looked down at Julian. He was sobbing on the floor. The realization was crushing him. He had not just been outsmarted by a vengeful ex-sister-in-law. He had spent 6 months romancing an undercover federal agent. Every dinner, every kiss, every conversation had been recorded, logged, and filed as evidence. He was the only rat in a room full of cats. Vanessa reached out a hand to help me up. I took it. Her grip was strong. She pulled me close and whispered something that the microphones didn't catch. She told me that the Lily Foundation was a nice touch. She told me that since the money Julian transferred was actually his own stolen cash, and he had legally authorized the transaction with his own biometric thumbprint, the donation was technically valid. She winked. The money wasn't going back to him. It was gone. Suddenly, Robert Sterling, the man playing the father, burst out laughing. He wasn't an oil tycoon. He was a retired police chief from Tampa who acted as a consultant for the bureau. The guests, finally realizing the danger was over, began to murmur. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the thrill of witnessing the most dramatic arrest in Miami history. 2 agents hauled Julian to his feet. He looked broken. He looked small. As they dragged him away, he passed by Gavin Roach. The man with the burned face leaned in. He didn't scream. He didn't hit Julian. He simply whispered 5 words. He told Julian to enjoy the cage. Julian was shoved toward the exit. The cameras flashed. The nightmare was over. Or so I thought. As the adrenaline faded, a new reality set in. I turned to Agent Vanessa. I asked her what happened now. I asked if I was under arrest for hacking, Fraude, and illegal surveillance. Technically, I had committed about 12 felonies in my quest for revenge. Vanessa looked at her boss, Agent Holcomb. They exchanged a silent look. Holcomb walked over to me. He was a tall man, with eyes that had seen too much. He looked at my tablet computer, the device I had used to drain Julian's accounts. He held out his hand. He demanded the device. I handed it over. My heart sank. I prepared myself for the handcuffs. I had avenged Lily, and if I had to go to prison for it, so be it. It was worth it. Holcomb took the tablet. He looked at the screen. Then, he did something unexpected. He dropped the tablet onto the marble floor. He stomped on it. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. The evidence of my hack was destroyed. He looked at me and shrugged. He said he must have been clumsy. He said he didn't see any illegal hacking device. He only saw a brave citizen who helped the FBI apprehend a dangerous fugitive. But then, his expression hardened. He told me that I was talented. He said my skills with encryption and social engineering were wasted on wedding planning. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was plain white, with a gold seal. He offered me a choice. I could walk out those doors and go back to being a wedding planner. Or, I could come to his office on Monday morning. He said the bureau had a shortage of people who could think like a criminal but act like a hero. I looked at the card. I looked at the shattered tablet. I looked at the exit where Julian was being loaded into a van. I took the card. I stood outside the Sterling estate with the FBI business card in one hand and my phone in the other. The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance. The adrenaline of the arrest was replaced instantly by a cold free arrest 1. Paralyzing fear. The photo on my screen was grainy. It showed the sterile white interior of room 304 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. It was a live view of my sister's bed. However, the bed was not empty. A dark silhouette stood over Lily's sleeping form. The figure wore a black hoodie. His face was obscured by shadow. My breath hitched in my throat. I had assumed Julian worked alone. I had assumed that once the head of the snake was cut off, the body would die. I was wrong. He had a contingency plan. He had a cleaner. Someone to tie up loose ends if the Miami operation went south. I sprinted toward my car. I ignored Agent Holcomb calling my name. I ignored the speed limit signs as I peeled out of the driveway. I dialed the hospital security desk as I wove through traffic. No answer. I dialed the nurse's station. Busy signal. Panic clawed at my chest. I was 1,000 miles away. Even if I drove to the airport and chartered a jet, it would take 3 hours to reach Chicago. My sister did not have 3 hours. She probably did not have 3 minutes. I needed help. I needed the very people I had tried to avoid for 6 months. I hit redial on the only number that mattered. Agent Vanessa answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm. I screamed into the phone. I told her about the text. I told her there was a man in Lily's room. I begged her to send a Chicago field team to the hospital immediately. Vanessa did not ask questions. She did not waste time with protocol. She simply told me to stay on the line. I heard the click of a keyboard in the background. I heard her barking orders to a dispatch unit. I drove blindly toward the Miami airport, tears blurring my vision. If I saved myself but lost Lily, none of this mattered. The revenge would be hollow. The victory would be ashes. 10 agonizing minutes passed. The silence on the phone line was deafening. Then, Vanessa's voice returned. It was softer this time. She told me the Chicago team had breached the room. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I asked if Lily was alive. I asked if they caught the man. Vanessa hesitated. She told me to pull over. My heart stopped. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt on the shoulder of the highway. I prepared myself for the worst news of my life. Vanessa explained the situation. The team had entered the room with weapons drawn. They found the man standing over the bed. They detained him without a struggle. However, he was not an assassin. He was not one of Julian's goons. He was a doctor. I frowned. I stared at the phone. I asked why a doctor would send me a threatening photo from a burner number. Vanessa corrected me. The doctor didn't send the photo. The photo was sent automatically by a security app on Lily's phone. I had installed a motion sensor app on Lily's phone months ago, hidden in the nightstand, to alert me if anyone entered the room. But why was the doctor there at 10 in the evening? Vanessa took a deep breath. She told me to listen carefully. The doctor was there because the patient had moved. I froze. Lily had been in a coma for 5 years. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She barely breathed on her own. Vanessa clarified. She told me that 10 minutes ago, while I was watching Julian get handcuffed in Miami. Lily opened her eyes in Chicago. I dropped the phone. The scream that left my throat was not one of fear. It was a sound of pure, overwhelming relief. I scrambled to pick up the phone. I asked Vanessa to repeat it. She confirmed it. Lily was awake. She was disoriented and weak, but she was conscious. The doctor was performing a neurological exam. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and sobbed. The timing was impossible. It was as if the universe had waited for the exact moment justice was served to grant me a miracle. Or perhaps, some invisible tether between sisters had snapped Julian's hold on our lives the moment he was defeated. I didn't go to the airport. I went to the FBI field office in Miami, where they had a secure video link set up. Agent Holcomb met me at the door. He didn't mention my reckless driving. He just led me to a private room with a large monitor. The screen flickered to life. I saw the hospital room. It looked brighter than in the grainy photo. A nurse was adjusting pillows. And there she was. Lily looked frail. Her skin was pale, and her hair was thin. But her eyes, those familiar green eyes, were open. They were looking around the room with confusion. The doctor held a tablet up to her face so she could see me. I waved. I tried to smile, but I was crying too hard. I realized suddenly that she wouldn't recognize me. I wasn't Jessica anymore. I was Jenny. I had a different nose, different cheeks, different hair. I spoke her name softly. She stared at the screen. She tilted her head. She looked at the blonde woman in the expensive dress. Then, she whispered one word. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. She called me Jess. She didn't see the plastic surgery. She didn't see the disguise. She saw her sister. We talked for an hour. It was mostly me talking and her blinking. I told her it was over. I told her the bad man was gone forever. I told her she was safe. I didn't tell her about the $3 million. I didn't tell her about the crimes I committed to save her. I didn't tell her that I was technically a criminal recruit for the federal government. That could wait. When the call ended, I walked out of the room. I felt lighter than I had in 5 years. The weight of the vendetta was gone. Agent Holcomb was waiting for me in the hallway. He held 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. He leaned against the wall and looked at me with a calculating expression. He told me that Julian Thorne was currently in an interrogation room. He was singing like a canary. He was giving up names of bankers, corrupt lawyers, and other con artists in his network. Holcomb took a sip of coffee. He mentioned that Julian kept screaming about a phantom woman who hacked his life. I sipped my coffee and looked innocent. Holcomb smiled. He told me that the Bureau had decided to grant the phantom woman full immunity for her past actions, provided she signed a contract. He pulled a document from his jacket. It was an employment contract. Consultant status. Cybersecurity and Social Engineering Division. The salary was modest compared to what I made as a wedding planner. But the benefits included full medical coverage for immediate family members. I looked at the clause about medical coverage. It would cover Lily's rehabilitation. It would pay for the best physical therapy in the country. I looked at Holcomb. I asked when I could start. He checked his watch. He said I started 5 minutes ago. He told me there was a file on his desk. A case involving a cryptocurrency scammer in Silicon Valley who was targeting pensioners. The suspect was smart, paranoid, and untouchable by legal means. Holcomb looked at me. He said they needed someone to get close to him. Someone who could become whoever the target wanted them to be. I finished my coffee. I crushed the paper cup and tossed it into the trash can. I told him I would need a new wardrobe. And maybe a new hair color. Red might be nice for California. I walked toward the exit of the FBI building. The Miami sun was rising over the city. I was no longer Jessica the victim. I was no longer Jenny the wedding planner. I was someone new. Someone dangerous. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly who I was meant to be. However, before I could step out into my new life, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a notification from the bank. The Lily Foundation account. I had set up an automated alert. It wasn't a deposit. It was a message attached to the final transfer confirmation of Julian's stolen millions. I opened it. It wasn't from a bank. It was a pre-recorded video file I had set to play for myself when the mission was complete. I clicked play. The face of the old Jessica, my face before the surgery, before the pain filled the screen. I had recorded it the night before my operation 5 years ago. The old Jessica looked scared. She was crying, but she looked into the camera and said something I had forgotten. She said, "Don't lose yourself. Jess. Remember that you are doing this for love, not hate. When you win, and you will win, promise me you'll come back." I stared at the screen. I touched my new face. I realized I couldn't go back to being her. That girl was gone, but I could honor her. I typed a reply to the dead girl in the video. I whispered it to the morning air. I promised her that we won. I stepped out into the sunlight. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I believe revenge is a dish best served publicly, with a side of forensic evidence and a garnish of federal indictments. It has been 3 months since the wedding at the Sterling estate. The fallout was spectacular. The media called it the Red Wedding of Coral Gables. The footage of Julian being handcuffed by his own bride went viral within hours. It was viewed 50 million times on social media. Julian Thorne pleaded guilty last week. He did not do it out of remorse. He did it because the evidence was overwhelming. Between my digital recordings and Agent Vanessa's undercover testimony, his defense attorney didn't stand a chance. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He was also ordered to pay restitution to his victims. Since he is bankrupt, he will work in the prison laundry for 12 cents an hour to pay back the millions he stole. By my calculation, he should be debt-free in about 4,000 years. Gavin Roach, the man with the burned face, was in the front row at the sentencing. He didn't smile. He just nodded once at me and walked out. He finally found the peace that had eluded him since the fire. As for Lily, she is walking again. It is a slow process. Her muscles are weak from 5 years of atrophy. But her spirit is iron. She moved into my apartment in Miami. Every morning, we drink coffee on the balcony and watch the sunrise. She doesn't remember the crash. She doesn't remember the pain. However, she remembers that I saved her. She asked me yesterday if I missed being a wedding planner. She asked if I missed the flowers, the cakes, and the romance. I looked at her and told her the truth. I told her that I never stopped planning. I just changed the objective. A wedding planner orchestrates a beginning. I orchestrate an ending. Both require attention to detail. Both require patience. Both require the ability to smile when everything is falling apart. I looked down at the file on my lap. It was the dossier Agent Holcomb had given me. The target is a man named Marcus Vane. He runs a cryptocurrency exchange in Silicon Valley. He steals retirement funds from teachers and firefighters. He thinks he is a god because he lives behind a wall of encryption. He is wrong. He is just another man with a secret. And I am the woman who is going to find it. I have already dyed my hair red. I have already created a new persona. This time, I won't be a servant. I will be an investor. I learned a valuable lesson on that altar in Florida. I learned that evil succeeds only when good people are afraid to get their hands dirty. We are taught to forgive. We are taught to turn the other cheek. We are taught that karma will eventually take care of the bad guys. But sometimes, karma is slow. Sometimes, karma is lazy. And sometimes, karma needs a little help from a woman with a shattered face and a plan. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The scars from my surgery are barely visible now. The face looking back at me is beautiful. But it is sharp. It is a weapon. I am not Jessica anymore. I am not Jenny. I am the consequence. I picked up my phone. I had one final message to send before I boarded the plane to San Francisco. It was a text to Vanessa. I thanked her for the handcuffs. She replied instantly with a smiley face emoji and a single sentence. She told me to try not to blow up any more weddings. I smiled. I couldn't make any promises. I grabbed my suitcase. I walked out the door and into the heat of the Miami morning. The world is full of monsters like Julian Thorne. They hide in boardrooms. They hide in mansions. They hide behind charming smiles and expensive suits. They think they are untouchable. They think nobody is watching. But they are wrong. I am watching, and I am just getting started. Do you think Julian got what he deserved, or was 25 years too short? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear the story of my next target in Silicon Valley, hit that subscribe button. The hunt continues next week.